Hi there. Thanks so much for joining me on this podcast. This is a series where we meet people who are sharing mind-body techniques for regulating the nervous system in diverse communities. My first guest today is Susy Strange. Susy's had a profound journey with a lot of significant shifts in her life as a result of practicing yoga. And she's gone on to open up her own studio, and she's currently working in a residential facility for women who've experienced drug addiction, and they're staying in the residential facility with their babies. We delve into the techniques that Susy is sharing to regulate the nervous system of the people that she's working with and techniques that she's used in her own life. So if you're on a healing journey, or you know someone on a healing journey, or you just like listening to inspired content, then stay tuned. Okay, thanks so much for joining us, Susy. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself to start with?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Susy Strange. I'm 52 years old, and I'm a yoga teacher, and I'm a biomedical trained yoga teacher. I'm a trauma-informed yoga teacher, and I'm also a yoga therapist. And I have recently done a postgrad in lifestyle medicine. So I kind of try to encompass all of those things in the practices that I teach now.
Amazing, Susy. And what was it that attracted you to yoga in the first place? Like, a lot of people, when you talk to them and they've tried yoga, will talk about how it's changed their life. What was it for you that attracted you on this journey?
So I'm definitely one of those yoga changed my life people. So I came to yoga actually through the physicality of yoga, so through the asana, the shapes that we make with our bodies. And I think that's true of a lot of people who find yoga. That's kind of their entry. So for me, when I was only 11 years old, I had a very serious spinal curvature. And I ended up having quite a lot of surgery and ultimately had my spine fused to a metal rod. So when I was in my 20s, I found the practice of yoga, and I finally found an exercise modality that allowed me to move in a way that kind of I was in control of. I could do more or less depending on how I was feeling and how my body was, feeling at the time. And what it did for me was allow me to find this practice that was for me, that allowed me to move with grace and with ease. And that in turn allowed me to kind of make friends with my body again. I'd sort of been at war with my body because it had let me down so badly at such a young age. And then from this feeling of ease and grace in my body, I think my muscles started to relax, and so I had less pain. My whole kind of demeanor changed. I became much more accepting, and when you become more accepting, you become less resentful and you become kinder in general. And then that's kind of when the real stuff of yoga starts to work. And then you become interested in the philosophy, and you realize that this whole practice is, miles away from just a movement practice, but that tends to be the entry point, and it was for me.
When you talk about yoga, what are the specific practices? Because I'm just imagining someone who hasn't experienced yoga. These are really bold claims about the way that it's changed your life and the way that it impacted you. What exactly do you think it was about what was being offered that really helped you at that time?
So I think, so I've got a quote on the back of my business cards, which is a Buddhist quote, and it says, "The body benefits from movement and the mind benefits from stillness." And I think ultimately that's what yoga really offers. So for my particular case, I needed to move my body, but I needed to move my body in such a way that wasn't going to harm me further. But I still needed to have a practice that kept me fit and healthy and all of those things. And yoga certainly does that. So in terms of specific practices from an asana point of view, from that movement perspective, I started off doing Ashtanga yoga, which is quite a strong physical practice, but I was quite young at the time. But one of the things I've taken from that is the Surya Namaskar practice, which is the sun salutation practice. And It's a practice that's essentially a series of shapes, but all linked in one movement, flowing with the breath. And you can make it as easy as you like. And I offer it in ways to other people that are very easy. And you can also make it as kind of intense and as advanced as you like too. But it's something that I've brought all the way through. And certainly that's been a very important part of my practice, just that simple flowing movement with breath. And then in terms of that stillness, using that movement to transition you to a space where your nervous system is calmed enough that you can take that stillness. So lying in Shavasana, allowing the body to relax, allowing the muscles to rest, I think is really important. And then the thing that links all of that really is the breath, and using the breath to link the movement, to bring the body to calm and to move it towards stillness.
I love that you mentioned the way that could be applied to you, at various stages, and the way that you apply the physical shapes with people of all different bodies and abilities as well. Because obviously people hear yoga and think they need to be particularly flexible, but what you're talking about is that, yes, some movement was helpful, done in a way that you could control, but actually that it was also about the breath and the mind as well.
Yes, and I think it's really important that people don't just think that you need to be flexible to do yoga. It certainly works the other way around. If you do yoga, the likelihood of you being more flexible is there, but you certainly don't start at that point of flexibility. And probably actually the only flexibility you need is in your mind. The willingness to embrace this practice, I think, is the most important step. And, I have a studio, and in my studio, I teach people that come to me saying, I don't think I can do yoga. And that to me is the best starting point. So I have a lot of people in their 70s. I have men who've been sportsmen for years and have lost flexibility. And I think understanding that everybody is a yoga body. And I used this example the other day to some of my group, that there's this kind of movement about a bikini body now. And the only rules for a bikini body is that you have a body and you wear a bikini. And it's the same for a yoga body. You have a body and you do yoga. And yoga might not even be movement for you. It could just be stillness. It could just be breath work. It could just be a state of mind. It could just be an attitude for that day. There's many practices that fall under the umbrella of yoga.
Could you tell me more about that? What are some of the go-to, because when people hear yoga, they think of the physical practices, but what are some of the go-to practices that have nothing to do with the body?
So I'll give you one example, which is a Buddhist practice called Metta Bhavana, which is really about a visualization based on compassion. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of my mums and baby groups, I'm sure. But I use this quite a lot with mums and baby groups because it's a practice where mum can sit. She doesn't have to sit on the floor if that's uncomfortable. She can sit on a sofa, on a seat, and just hold baby. And with the eyes closed, I start to lead mum through a practice of visualization, and starting off by visualizing somebody or something or a place that they really love, that they feel comfortable and happy, and feeling those feelings in the body of that comfort and peace and happiness. And once we've visualized that person or thing, we extend a greeting towards them. And it's a really simple greeting of, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you be at peace, and may you be loved. And we extend that practice through to somebody that they don't know very well, and ultimately we extend that practice to themselves. And as they sit and hold baby, they both go very quiet, and mum's nervous system, as it regulates, starts to co-regulate baby. And it's a really simple, lovely practice that has nothing to do with movement, just movement of the mind, movement of the spirit, movement of the intention, and ultimately of the nervous system.
I love that so much. Thank you for sharing. And I can't wait to talk about some more practices that you use with the mums and babies group as well. I'm curious though, before we move in that direction, what are some of the ways that your healing journey has affected your life path? Because obviously you mentioned some really challenging times physically early in your life and the ways that you've been managing that. I can imagine then that has profoundly shifted your life path.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it wasn't really until I started studying trauma-informed yoga with you that I really understood that I'd been through trauma. And I think there are many people like that who have these events that happen early in their lives, but they've no frame of reference to understand that that was traumatic, and that some of the ways they then show up in the world as a result are directly linked to that early trauma. So it took me a long time, I was in my 40s when I met you, to understand that kind of trauma. So I think I spent a lot of time going through life ignoring what had happened to me. I had a lot of surgery at 11, a lot more at 16. Having a big deformity of the spine has meant my body's very short. I've got a big hump on my back. As a young girl, that's quite an assault to the body image. I went through periods of eating disorders, various ways of kind of not being at one and not being kind to my own body. I also put a lot of pressure on myself to perform. I went into a very competitive career, ended up as global head of marketing for a big medical device company, always kind of on that side of medicine and health, specialising really in the cardiovascular space at that time. But from being in my 20s, I had yoga, and the yoga helped me through all of that. It was a place to go to, and probably I didn't understand the mechanisms. I just knew it made me feel better. And it wasn't until after really studying with you, Danielle, that I realised that this could be my career. And through having trauma, through then coupling that with a modality that helped me, those two things together have led me to where I am. And where I am now is that yoga has become my purpose. It's my job. It's my way of connecting with other people. It's my way of managing things for me and for friends and family too. So it's kind of become everything. But out of that trauma has been born this kind of really wonderful thing.
I think a lot of people will resonate with having these experiences but not having a framework or a way of processing them or kind of realizing what they were in the context.
Yeah.
And it really does seem like, particularly these past few years, that there are more people kind of reflecting on the impact and the legacy of things or events that have happened to us that might not be classically what we think of as trauma, that have had a particular lasting impact on the mind and body.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I once taught a class, it was actually up at Swami's yoga retreat, and you kind of get all comers, and there was a beautiful girl who was very committed to her yoga practice, but she had that her left arm had been amputated. And at the end of the class, and it was a class all about trauma and a workshop about trauma, at the end of the class she came up to me and she said, "Thank you so much. I never realised I'd had trauma. You've allowed me to recognise that I've had trauma in my life." And this was a young woman missing a limb who hadn't been given that opportunity to reflect on having trauma. And I think what we do often in the work that we do is we almost give people permission to allow themselves to feel. And by feeling, they can start to allow some of these feelings to come through. And by feeling these feelings, they can start to process them and move through them.
Absolutely. And do you think, what is yoga offering in addition to more traditional talk therapies for that process? Why is it important to include the body as well?
So I think there's a brilliant book that I know you know, The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk. And I think his kind of history of going through all of the processes from, the way they dealt with mental health in the 70s all the way through that talk therapy exposure to where he is now, which is that the body is so important in this process, I think comes down really to our old friend, the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve being the 10th pair of cranial nerves that come down and innervate the throat, innervate all the way down through the heart, the lungs, coming all the way down to the stomach. And 80% of the nerve fibers in the vagus nerve communicate from body to brain. And this is the nerve that's really responsible for helping us with our parasympathetic nervous system and helping get us into these states of rest and relaxation and digest. But only 20% is communicated from the brain downwards. So it's very difficult, as we all know, if we're in a state of stress, to think ourselves out of that, or to be told to calm down. It almost makes things worse. But if we can calm the body, we can then help the brain to calm. And I think the key is the breath, because of all the autonomic nervous system. So, we don't have to remember to breathe at night. We don't have to tell our heart to beat. We don't have to tell our glands to release the hormones. These things always happen automatically. But the only part of that autonomic nervous system that we do have conscious control over is the breath. So by using the breath and linking it to movement, we can hack into that nervous system, and ultimately we can use the practice to calm the brain. And that is what helps us heal from trauma, because we can move ourselves out of these very small windows of tolerance. We can move ourselves out of this heightened cortisol loop by using these practices that involve the body. So mind-body therapies, I think, really are the key.
One of the missing pieces, though, is a lot of services still offering talk therapy only.
Yeah.
And so many people could be benefiting from these mind-body therapies, but unfortunately it's not everywhere when you look at the different services for people who need it most. So can you tell me a little bit more about the ways that you've been shifting that?
I think the most important thing to do is start to legitimize these mind-body therapies. So my background, as I said, is mainly in this cardiovascular space. I'm married to a doctor. I work with a lot of doctors. I have a lot of doctors as friends. When I first started studying, I studied biomedical yoga. And I had a lot of these scientists saying to me, biomedical yoga, isn't that an oxymoron? How do those two things sit together? And I think there's this kind of sense that because yoga is this ancient practice, rather than understand the validation of this ancient lineage and it must be good and it must work because it's been around for so long, people use that to kind of delegitimize it and make it sound as though it's some kind of woo-woo. So I think my work has really been in trying to bridge that gap between the science and the ancient practice. And actually science is starting to catch up with that ancient wisdom now, which is really good. And it's become easier to do that. So for me, it's undertaking legitimate trainings like the trauma-informed training that you offer, Danielle, the biomedical training that I did with the Biomedical Institute of Yoga and Meditation, but also undertaking a postgrad degree in lifestyle medicine. And lifestyle medicine, a new branch of medicine, is essentially based on all of the yoga practices. So by having that underpinning of education, that kind of legitimization, it opens the doors to allow you to speak in a credible way on these practices. And when I work with clients, I really blend the two together, so people understand the evidence base and the science behind the practices that we're doing. So I think by trying to get that out there in a way that explains the science and the evidence is really important. And certainly it's something I do with all of my clients. They don't do things for no reason. They understand the reasons why they're doing them, and I think that helps them to work.
You're currently in a rehabilitation centre for women who've experienced drug addiction and they're there with their babies. Can you tell me about what's the impact? How did that class come to be? And have providers been really receptive to the messages that you're sharing and the practices that you're sharing?
Yeah, so after I finished my trauma-informed training, I felt really compelled to share the practices and to share them in a really meaningful way. And I looked around for a while, and then I don't really know why I came to addiction. I think because there's some really good evidence out there. I think it was this hybridizing for me of the scientific base with the practices. And I think addiction is a real area where there's reasonably good evidence and reasonably strong evidence for yoga as a practice that helps massively. I landed on Phoebe House and they invited me in. And they'd never thought of yoga before. It wasn't something they'd ever entertained, but I went and had a meeting with the manager there and they were in, to the point where the Yoga Impact Charity charity very generously supports a 10-week pilot program. So there was no initial investment for them other than just a bit of good faith and trust. So I wrote a 10-week program that was very science-backed, and I gave that to them so that they could feel that their clients who were very vulnerable and very high need were in safe hands, which they did, and they trusted me, which was wonderful. And I've been sharing, I think this is the fourth 10-week program that I've shared now. The impact has been just fantastic. The impact on the women, their ability to graduate through the program in Phoebe House has increased. Their ability to manage their lives, their opportunity to have a practice to come back to when they need it the most is kind of like a real gift for them as they see it. So I know I've talked for a long time now, but just to give you a very brief overview, this is a 9-month residential program for these women. Most of them are on methadone. They've come from backgrounds of heroin or ice use, all from significant trauma as children, very high ACEs as children, and which has led them to make decisions that have been difficult and had consequences. Most of them are either coming to the program straight from prison or recently out of prison. Some of them have their babies with them. Many of them are pregnant in the house and go to have their babies from the house and then come back to the house. Many of them have other children that are in care or with family members. So they're very complex and they have a lot going on, but they are my favourite people in the world. Really wonderful people, and they've embraced yoga in a way that I could never have anticipated.
And Susy, you mentioned ACEs. I'd love if you could elaborate a little more. What is an ACE?
So an ACE sounds like a good thing, but unfortunately isn't. So it's an adverse childhood event score. So adverse childhood events can be anything from separation of the family, divorce, it could be family violence, it could be sexual abuse as a child. There's lots of things that come into that category, but really any event that disrupts that normal formation, that normal grounding that you have as a child, that really disrupts the nervous system and the normal nervous system responses. So the women that I deal with have very high scores, and I think it's 7 or more that really kind of leads to problems, particularly with drug and alcohol addiction, becomes very common in people who have a high ACE score. So through no fault of their own, they end up in this situation that's very difficult, and they're really trying to do the right thing by their children. And it's hard for them. You know, addiction is very hard. It's a disease of the mind. It's very difficult. But they're working so hard, and to be able to help them in some way is a real privilege.
And Susy, for people who either haven't experienced yoga themselves or kind of unaware of some of the research between some of the techniques that you're sharing and these ACEs, what do the two have to do with each other? Why is yoga helpful for people who've experienced sexual abuse as a child, or how is what you're sharing connected?
When you've had a lot of trauma as a child, you end up with this kind of very heightened nervous system response to everyday things. So your kind of trauma trigger stays switched on. And that means that if you get stuck in traffic, for instance, the likelihood of you having a bit of a meltdown because of that is much, much higher. Or if somebody rejects you, the feeling of rejection is probably amplified, and therefore your response is a little bit different. And it's this kind of switching on, this constant switching on of the sympathetic nervous system that becomes problematic. And without any tools to learn how to switch this off, it becomes very difficult. And one of the things that happens when this sympathetic system is switched on is that the body releases a lot of cortisol. And cortisol actually affects an area of the brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is the area of the brain that helps control this system. So the cortisol damages the very control center that controls the system. So you get stuck in this loop. And what yoga does, and both the movement and the breath work and the stillness of yoga does, is it helps to break this loop, and it gives people techniques that they can go to that allows them to pull themselves back into this more sympathetic state, pull themselves back into rest and relaxation. And I think one of the things that happens with my girls in the class is they become quite disconnected from their bodies in trauma. So if you have them on all fours and you ask them to extend one leg behind them whilst exhaling, that's a lot for their brain to think about. And they really have to reconnect mind and body in order to perform this movement. When they do that, and they do that for a while, repeated with different movements, they realise at the end of it that they've switched their brain off and they've just been focusing on breathing and moving. And they've been in their body and their breath for the first time in a long time and not in their minds. And I think that's probably a very long answer to the connection between the ACEs and the practice.
That's such powerful work, Susy. Can you tell me about, are you sharing a special kind of yoga? Can anyone just go in and work with these vulnerable populations? What is it about the way that you're sharing that enables people to feel safe and are comfortable in your classes?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And certainly I've had people come to me when I've been doing general trauma-informed classes saying to me, wow, yoga normally triggers me, and this is the first time I haven't been triggered. And I think you have to be very careful. I love all yoga. All yoga is fantastic, but you have to use the right type of yoga with the right population. So going to a gym kind of power yoga class would not be the right thing for calming the nervous system. So I'm very fortunate I had you, Danielle, just your fantastic training and the wonderfully kind and calm and generous way that you offer that training to so many people has given me a skill set that allows me to understand that the thing that these people that I work with have not had in their life is the power to choose. And so when we offer yoga to them, we're very clear that this is a choice. It's their choice. It's their practice. It's their time. When I start with groups like Phoebe House, I make it very clear that if they don't want to join in, that's absolutely their choice. Phoebe House likes them to be in the room. That's their one stipulation. It is mandatory for them to sit in the room. But once they're in the room, I make it very clear if they want to lie down and close their eyes, if they want to sit at the back, as long as they don't disturb other people's ability to do the practice, then that's all good. When we do the practice, we make sure that they know that everything's an invitation. There's no pressure to move in a certain way. If something doesn't feel good in their body that day, please don't feel that you have to do it. If you want to choose another shape that feels better, choose another shape. If you want to just join in with the breath cues, just join in with the breath cues. And what I often have is people who want to watch for the first couple of classes, just so that they understand what's going to happen. And slowly they start to come down to the mat and they start to join in, which is really lovely. I had a lady yesterday who was new to the class, and at the end of it she said, I wasn't going to come, but one of the other girls came to get me and said, I promise you'll like it. She said, I have very severe ADHD. And I think for somebody like that, the thought of sitting in a space that might be quiet, where they might have to be still and they might have to focus on their own body, is absolutely terrifying. So creating a space that's not too quiet, that's not too still, where I don't leave them too long in their own minds, but by cultivating it over a program of 10 weeks to help bring them to stillness is key. And we have fun as well. We do some silly things too. So I think, in answer to your question, no, not just anybody can do it. It's very important if you're going to offer yoga to populations who've been through trauma. It's very important that you're a trauma-informed, trauma-trained teacher.
And can you tell me more about the classes? What does the arc of the journey that you're taking people on look like? What are some of the most effective components that you've observed?
Okay, so we start off very light, and I generally start off in the first class. I will always acknowledge everything that they're doing. You know, aside from now having to come to this yoga class, they're they're brilliant every day of their lives. They're clean at the moment. They're bringing these babies into the world. Maybe their bodies are creating a baby, which is just an unbelievable feat in itself. So an acknowledgement of what they're doing. A little bit about myself so that they can understand my journey and who I am. And understanding that there's no expectations of perfect poses. I mean, if they copy the shape of my body, then, they're going to be making a funky shape. So, and understanding that it's their body and their shapes. We just move through having a really informal, lovely chat, learning a little bit about where yoga comes from, what the word yoga means, and why it might be fun to try. So we start off very gently. By about week 5 or 6, maybe we're starting to talk a little bit about trauma and experiences that may have happened and how these practices help. Sometimes I take in an orange and get them to peel the orange and look at the little white pith around the segments of the orange, and we start to talk about fascia and how traumatic experiences can tense that fascia and how movement can help alleviate some of that tension, and how we can explore emotions that come up as we alleviate that tension. So we go on this journey, and it's usually about week 6 that the girls are saying, they're very quiet, and I say, oh, it's very quiet in here today, girls, and they go, oh yes, but that's good, isn't it? And I go, oh yeah, it's lovely. So we move in this very gentle way. One of the things that I do try to do at the beginning is make it fun. So one of the things the girls love is the cat-cow mantra. So there's a movement in yoga called cat and cow, where you're on all fours and you make a kind of cat shape with your back as you round your spine, and then you make this cow shape as you arch your back and lift your head and your tail. And I always say to them quite seriously, I had an Indian yoga teacher who always made us sing the mantra when we did this, and would you like to try? And they go, oh okay, and I have them moo and meow and they laugh their heads off, and we move and we realize that this is a fun process as well, and it kind of takes the pressure and the seriousness away.
I love that, and there's so much evidence about the importance of play and some silliness.
Yeah.
I can imagine it really disarming the group and allowing them to slip into a very spontaneous mind frame.
But I knew I'd really got them when they came to me and said, next week, could we do the full hour just as a yoga nidra? And I was like, sure we can. You want an hour of stillness lying down, that's fabulous. So yeah, so bringing them very gently through the journey, but the transformation is just unbelievable.
And there's so much research talking about yoga nidra and the impact, and particularly for some of the groups that are healing from trauma. Can you talk to me about yoga nidra? What is it? Why do you think it's helpful?
So yoga nidra really just means yogic sleep, and it's really a guided relaxation and a guided visualization. And there's kind of quite traditional rules around yoga nidra I think are important. So what we'd normally do is I'd normally do a bit of movement first, just to get all the wiggles and jiggles out of the way, and then we'd come down to lying in a position, and it doesn't have to be the traditional shavasana lying on your back. It can be any position that feels safe and comfortable in the room for the clients. So they come into a comfortable position, and then we talk through a guided body scan, where they get to connect mind and body by visualizing all the parts of their body. And sometimes that can be difficult, visualizing all 10 toes. But we move through all parts of the body, just bringing attention and awareness to them so that we can start to let go of any tension. And then we go through a process of looking at opposite sensations. So maybe the body feels really light and they can almost feel themselves floating, and then maybe the body feels really heavy and they feel like they're making an imprint in the mat. But all the while we're just keeping the mind quite occupied and keeping the mind and the body together as one. And then we go through this process, and then at the end we might introduce some element that maybe is needed in that group, and we introduce a visualization around that element. So it might be in this group, because there's this kind of trauma background and this heightened anxiety, maybe the element that we need to bring in is the earth element, and they need to feel quite grounded and safe in their bodies. So we might take a little visualized walk in nature, maybe barefoot with our feet on the earth. We might walk towards somewhere that feels really safe, and we might sit down in that safe place, and we might find a little mantra that helps us feel safe. And so maybe in our minds we repeat, I am safe, I am secure, I am comfortable in my body. And then once we've done that, we'll try to bring them out of that kind of state of relaxation and meditation. Maybe we'll get them to gently feel into the space around them. Maybe they'll listen to the sounds in the room and start to bring that outside back in. Maybe they'll start to wiggle their fingers and their toes. Quite often they don't. They like to stay. And it's funny how they find this comfort in stillness and silence through that process. But it's a very kind of handheld process.
And you talk so much about nervous system regulation in all of the discussion that we've had so far. Can you tell me about some of the most impactful practices that you shared in the program so far?
Simple movement linked with the breath. And that can be, many different things. But I think so movement linked with breath, I think, is really important. So we do something really simple, such as we inhale and we raise our arms above our head. And then on the exhale, we cross the right hand to the left shoulder and then the left hand to the right shoulder. And then when we get there, we close our eyes and we simply rock side to side. And we're just aware of giving ourselves this little bit of a hug, a little bit of self-compassion and love. And we do that for a few moments. And then with awareness and an inhale, we lift the left arm away and then the right arm away. And with an exhale, we bring the hands back down. So it's really simple, but it's actually a little bit of a trick, because to coordinate mind, body, breath, left, right, and then the compassion, we've stilled the mind through the trick of entertaining the mind to be able to sit silently and give ourselves a little bit of a hug. So this really simple process of moving with breath, and we do a few of those throughout.
I love that, Susy. And with the women that you're working with, I can imagine that there are things that they can take with them and apply in their lives. What are some of the most useful techniques and practices from the yoga world that they've said to you, I found this really useful in my everyday life? Yeah,
so I think the ability to connect with breath is really important. So just that knowledge that the only part of the autonomic nervous system that you can control is your breath. And if you're feeling stressed or if you're feeling triggered, you can always come back to your breath. And so by moving yourself back out of that situation, maybe closing the eyes if that feels safe, maybe putting your hands on your body and taking some really deep, slow breaths can really help. If you can elongate the exhale in that breathing, so maybe you breathe in for 4 and then you might start to breathe out for 5. That elongation of the exhale helps again to tap into that vagus nerve that helps to bring us into that feeling of rest and relaxation. So being able to use the breath. Sound, I think, is really important. So just simple humming. Humming, again, does 2 things. If you inhale and then you exhale on a hum, it elongates the breath. So again, stimulating that vagal tone. But it also stimulates the vocal cords, which stimulate the vagus nerve too. So if you're in the car and you're driving and you're in traffic, just inhale and exhale with a hum. And do that maybe 5 or 10 times, just to bring everything down. I think the other is grounding yourself. So using your senses to ground yourself. So finding a seat, maybe on the ground, maybe just with your feet on the ground. Using your senses to listen to the sounds around you, hearing the sounds that are around you in the room, maybe naming 5 of those sounds to bring yourself into the space. And then thinking of maybe 3 or 4 things that you can feel. Maybe you can feel yourself on the seat, your clothes against your body, maybe your hands on your body. Maybe with the eyes open, just noticing a few things that you can see, and then tapping into the breath and slowing it down. Just having that ability to ground, to calm everything down when you need to. And the other thing I think that's important, and one thing that I give them when they leave, when they graduate, is a journal. So being able to write down some of their feelings, because I think what yoga does is allow them to feel feelings that they haven't felt for quite a long time.
And you've mentioned that a lot of the women that are at the residential care facility are there with their babies or are pregnant at the time. You also mentioned co-regulation earlier. I wonder if you can elaborate a little more on why regulation, nervous system regulation is so important, but also talk to us about what is co-regulation and why should we care?
Yeah, so we constantly pick up feedback, and we particularly pick up feedback from other humans. So if we're constantly around other humans that are stressed or angry or any of those things, particularly as a child, then we're going to pick up on the other person's stress, and that in turn is going to affect our nervous system, and maybe then baby starts crying and baby's more agitated, and then mum picks up on baby's stress, and they just end up in this loop of this dysregulation where they're everything's just kind of escalating into this picture of stress. But if mum's aware that this can happen, and mum has techniques that she can regulate her nervous system, it can allow her in turn to help regulate baby, and then baby's calmer, and they're then in this much more regulated loop that makes things much easier and feel much nicer for both of them. So if mum can use the hack of the breath to calm her nervous system, and that gives her enough bandwidth to pick up baby and bring baby to her and allow baby to then feel mum's slowed breath and then mum's slowed heartbeat, then baby can start to regulate their nervous system too, and they become in this much more positive, co-regulated space. And it doesn't just have to be with baby either, with all of the interactions that they have, maybe with the partner, maybe with their parents, maybe just out in the world. If they can come at things from a more regulated space, suddenly other people's behaviour around them starts to change too.
And what about you? What's your go-to hack for the nervous system? You're sharing all of these techniques in the classes that you're teaching, but what's your go-to method when you're seeking some calm?
Sound for me, and sound for me goes with breath. So I use sound in terms of the breathing practices I've described. So there's a breathing technique in yoga called Brahmari breathing, and Brahmari means black bee. And with Brahmari breathing, we take an inhale, and as we exhale, we close down the eyes and close the ears, and we hum. And this humming we hear resonating in our head, and just normal humming does the same thing really, but again it uses that kind of double whammy on the nervous system, because it elongates the exhale, but it also stimulates the vagus nerve with the sound. So I use that, but I also like to listen to sound. So I listen to a lot of mantra. The Sanskrit language is a very vibrational language. So if you listen to music with words in Sanskrit, that also has a very calming effect on the body. And once you get into this, you might start singing the mantra too, which is what I go to. If I'm really stressed, singing mantra really, really helps me. And the voice is a bit like the yoga body. People will say to me, oh, I don't have a voice, and I say, oh no, but it's like the yoga body and the bikini body. If you have a voice, you have a voice. Don't let anybody judge how that voice sounds, because you can use it to feel good. So for me, I think it's a combination of movement, stillness, breath and sound is what I go to. So I'll throw out a few sun salutations. I'll use that to take me into stillness. Whilst I'm doing it, I'll listen to some beautiful music, and at the end I might use some breath work like Brahmari breath to kind of end that little practice. And it doesn't have to be for long. It can be 10 minutes, but the difference is huge.
You've mentioned the established benefits of meditation, but I think a lot of people, or some people, can really struggle when it comes to, well, how do I meditate? What technique? Are they all created equal, or which type of meditation?
So I like to meditate on a mantra, and I use Sanskrit mantras to meditate on, but you can use any kind of affirmation. I'm getting better at meditation. Could be one. But it helps the mind focus on something that's relatively benign. So when the mind starts to wander, you can go, oh, hang on, I'm getting better at meditation, and just repeat that. And it stops this spiral of thoughts, and it helps train the brain that you're in charge and you can bring it back. So you don't have to be at the mercy of the thought spirals. And you and I both know this, Danielle, but there's Yoga Sutra 1.2, which is Yoga's Vritti Chitta Nirodha, which basically says that yoga quietens the whirling vortex of the mind stuff. And I think most people who've had trauma can identify this with this whirling vortex of mind stuff. By using a mantra, we calm all of that and we bring it back. So I think mantra meditation is really useful. I think the Buddhist practice of noticing the thoughts, just being in mindful awareness, is also really useful. People feel they're no good at meditation because thoughts come. Well, that's what the mind does. Thoughts will come. The trick is just noticing the thoughts. Okay, I'm thinking. Okay. And then bringing the mind back. Maybe you bring the mind back to the breath. Maybe you bring the mind back to a mantra, or maybe you bring the mind back just to the body. But noticing the thoughts is the important thing, and accepting that they're going to be there. I think as you kind of progress through that noticing the thoughts, you can start to label the thoughts. Negative thinking. Okay. Positive thinking. Okay. But just kind of playing with it, not taking it too seriously. Giving yourself 5 minutes where you're going to be quiet, in quiet reflection, but using a technique to prevent the spiraling. So whether that's mantra, focus on the breath, or thought labeling, there are many different ways to do it. But finding a way to let your brain know that there's somebody else in charge is really helpful.
It's powerful. And I'm wondering if you can talk to me about some of the stories that have stuck with you from people that you have worked with. What are some of the ways that this practice has transformed their experience in life?
Yeah, I think, I've been very fortunate to have gained the trust of people who have been very vulnerable. And a lot of the stories are, pretty horrific. And they start very early on in childhood. One of the girls said to me the other day, she said, I haven't told you this. She said, she was pregnant when I first started the program, and she went through a lot of her pregnancy with me, and then she had her baby, and she's got the beautiful, gorgeous little girl, and they have the most amazing relationship. And she's actually graduated from the program, but I saw her yesterday because she came back for a visit. But she said to me once, she said, I didn't tell you this. She said, but when I was my daughter's age, I was in a rehab centre, the same as Phoebe House, with my mum. And she said, and I just can't believe that my life has come to this, and I'm here too. She said, but through yoga, I know that my daughter will not be in this situation, because I now have these techniques that I can use on the outside that my mum didn't have to stop the loop that she was in. So I think helping people by offering and sharing techniques that they can use to break the cycle, I think is the most important thing. I have another woman who's in there right now. She comes from an indigenous community. And I mentioned to her through the yoga how graceful she is. Like, oh my goodness, the way you move your body, you're so graceful. I said, are you a dancer? And she said, I'd kind of forgotten that part of my story. I used to be in this Indigenous dance group. There was an organisation that came around to schools, and they picked people from primary school to join this dance group. And through the yoga, she's found this love of dance again, and this area of her life that was important to her as a child that she'd lost through trauma and lost through her experience with drugs, that's now reopening for her. So I think it's an avenue to self, and that self is many things, but it's an avenue back to self.
That's really powerful, Susy. Thank you for sharing.
I think the most important thing is nobody should ever be written off, whether that's through their experiences, whether it's through the choices that they might have made, whether it's through, being addicted to drugs whilst being pregnant, or whether it's through age. I have people who have been told that they probably shouldn't be moving anymore. They're in their late 70s. Maybe it's time to accept what's happening with their bodies. I think, I really try to link the work that I do with the medical community, particularly through lifestyle medicine. And I think educating the scientific community that everybody can benefit from this practice, no matter how old, no matter what they've been through, no matter what judgment other people might place upon them. Having access to this kind of service is really important. And I think I mentioned earlier that I'm also a yoga therapist. Yoga therapy was removed from the NDIS schemes. I think that was really unfortunate. I think it's important that we collectively try to increase our share of voice and increase the evidence base so that more people who need mind-body therapies can access it through channels that are supported by government, by medical practitioners. So I guess getting that out there for me is probably an important message.
And what's the impact been on the service that you've been partnering with? You mentioned Phoebe House, for instance. I'm sure they've been on a journey as well. They hadn't had yoga before. They've experienced these programs with you.
Yeah.
What's their perspective on all of this, and how are they feedbacking to you about the impact?
Yeah, so a bit like me, when I first met you, Danielle, I'd never heard of this thing called trauma-informed yoga, even though I was already in the yoga community and already studying yoga to be a teacher. So it was not something that they'd heard of or ever thought about when I approached them. But by having this kind of scientific, evidence-based approach to the practice, I was able to let them understand how important it would be to have the opportunity to share this with their communities. And they've been on a journey, and the residents in the house have been on a journey. And what Phoebe House now fully believe is that they are committed to a rolling program of offering yoga. They want to commit to doing that, ad infinitum as far as they're concerned. All new people come into the house are exposed to the program. It is a mandatory part of their program now. It's something that they're very keen to promote, and it's become a very, very key part of the therapy for the people who go through their program. And they're certainly looking at how graduation rates are being affected for those people who've been through the program versus those people before the program.
That's so fantastic. And what does their involvement look like? How has it worked? Have they observed the classes? What does that look like?
Yeah, so it's kind of changed over time. So from the beginning, they would always have a social worker in the room. So they originally did a 10-week pilot, very generously supported by the Yoga Impact charity. So they didn't have to outlay any cost. And they had their social worker was in the room, so they're making sure that it's a very, very safe environment for everybody. So we kind of collectively ran that program. By the end of the pilot, they were very much convinced. Sometimes I have a social worker in the room doing the class, joining in, because they very much recognise that their job is quite stressful, and by having a practice that allows them to regulate the nervous system is really useful.
Thank you so much, Susy, for sharing all of the inspiring work that you're doing and your journey as well. It's been so wonderful hearing about the rich experience that you've had in your life and the way that you've then shared that with other people.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking me. And thank you, Danielle, for all the work that you do with the Yoga Impact charity and all the knowledge that you so generously share with all the teachers that come through your fantastic training. So thank you.
Thanks, Susy.